Narayanam namaskritam naram cheva narottamam devim sarasatim vyasam tato jayo dhiret. Nishtaprayashu bhadresu nityam bhagavata sevya bhagavati uttamashuki bhaktir bhavati naistiki. Nigama kalpadurugaritam param shukamakaram mitadyavisamyatam pibata bhagavatam rashamalayam mahora hora shikubuvi bhagaham. Krishna swadam bhagavate damagiri shara karo nashta dushamasha parana kodunoditaham. Twamapiya dabhushuddha vishuddham vibhu samyapirena vidam virutsaram pragyahidoho maradam samkleshanivanamusanti nanyataham. Om Aganatimrandasya Ganangana Salakya Chaksurun Miritam Yanatashmai Sri Gurave Namah Sri Chaitanya Marobhistam Stapitam Yadabhutare Swayam Rupa Karamayam Darati Swaparantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Siyata Parakamaram Sri Gurun Vaishnavam Sya Sri Rupam Sagadaram Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Stam Sadevam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Paran Sahagana Larita Shri Vishikan Vitam Stam Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pastaya Bhutade Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamane Namaste Sarasati Devi Gauravani Pachadine Nirvishesa Sunyavadi Praskita Desatari Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Motivational Monday Ki Jai. Good morning, Anjali. Dandavat Pranams. She calls me the postman. We have a famous basketball player in Utah, Karl Malone, played for the Jazz for many years. They called him the postman also because he would deliver the ball through the basket, receiving passes from the celebrated John Stockton. In fact, there's a car dealership right along the freeway on Interstate 15 North called Stockton to Malone. Car dealership. That's the name of it, the brand name. If you're not from Utah, it might be a little oblique, but everybody in Utah who lived here within the last 30 years knows what Stockton to Malone, what the import of Stockton to Malone is. And just as Stockton would get it to Malone and Malone would be the postman delivering it to the basket, the implication is that they will deliver you a reliable used car. Hare Krishna. Jai. Ram Kishore Das, thank you very much for joining us. We have Ram Kishore, Taruni, and Jimmy up there in Minnesota. No idea what the weather is there. Jean, wish you good health. Rupa Manjari has been practically at every single podcast since COVID started, going on 1 year now. Thank you all for joining us. Motivational Monday. Did you see our post on Facebook last week? Our first crop of lettuce and spinach from the greenhouse. Check it out. So succulent, so tender. It's starting. The spring is coming. Lettuce and spinach from the greenhouse are coming. We haven't started growing in the outside yet because the frost line is generally May 17th, but soon we'll be applying ourselves to the outdoors, and by end of July, beginning of August, we'll have tons and tons of melons, green peppers, zucchinis, all kinds of flowers, chilies, you name it, Italian squash. We're looking forward to a wonderful season of Krishna consciousness here in Spanish Fork, Utah, up in Salt Lake City. And also, last weekend our attendance was a little slim because of Easter weekend and conference weekend, but this past Saturday in Salt Lake City and yesterday in Spanish Fork, things have roared back with a vengeance, starting to head. Really robust crowds now, enthusiastic crowds. Jai Krishna, before he led the first kirtan last evening at the Sunday feast, he looked over at the sitting crowd, many of them youngsters. He said, "You look like a group that could sing really well." And I said, "How can you tell by looking whether they'll sing really well?" But the fact was that when Jai Krishna started singing the kirtan, people wholeheartedly, full-throatedly, you might say, responded. A lot of times you'll do kirtan, and even though you tell people the nature of kirtan is call and response, they feel more comfortable just sitting there and absorbing it. But this crowd was participatory. They full-throated chanted. Sounded like one of those choirs that Jayadev puts together over there in the UK. It was really, really gratifying. Similarly, the previous day in Salt Lake City, a lot of people, big crowds. And during the week, we're serving out an average of 75 plates every Saturday to tourists and visitors who come off the freeway. It's a great time to be alive, and I'm so glad. We could have shut down during COVID. We would have every reason to do so, but we didn't. And I'm so glad. I'm so glad that Krishna kept us safe, protected our health, and we were able to preach these last 6 months instead of just putting ourselves on the sidelines. Thank you, Krishna, on so many different levels. We'll never come to the end of our thankedness for you. So thanks very much. Joining John Malik jumped in also. He says he enjoyed the kirtan last night. John is, when John says he enjoyed the kirtan, that's a high compliment because John is a kirtan leader, a kirtan teacher par excellence. Rob, how are you doing this morning?
I'm good, Prabhuji. Thank you for asking. Ready for a new day.
All right, ready for a new day, ready for a new week. Rob's a farmer, and we're looking forward to his visiting Spanish Fork and giving us his sagacious agrarian advice here. But we have some experience ourselves as well. That lake you see behind me has 150 at least big koi fish in it, and that water is nutrient rich. You cannot even imagine. And it's on the highest point of our property. So we don't need any pumps or anything. We just siphon it in the beginning of the year, turn it on and off with a valve, and it feeds our 2 garden areas with nutrient-rich water from the lake. That and the llama poop we spread on the gardens until then ensures that we have outstanding crops every year. So shall we get to the verse at hand? This is our 4th time visiting this verse. It is the 10th verse in the 5th canto, the 5th chapter, the 1st canto of the Bhagavatam, as follows: Nayad Vichashtitam Hare Yasho Jagat Pavitam Bhagaditi Kari Tadvayasham Tirtam Vishanti Nandya Niyataham Shah Nirmanti Shiksha. This verse is actually one of a couplet. You might say this is the crow verse. The one that follows it, Tadbhag Vishargo Janatagavi Yajmin Prati Shogam Abhida Navami Antasha Hadorpara Goyani Bridani Kritani Cheshmara. And that's the Swan Verse. This one describes crow-like men who have no interest in spiritual topics, but never tire of the same old murder and sleuth and inspector and the same old stuff rehashed over and over and over and over and over again. And that which has been rejected in general is the nectar for the crows. But that which is revolutionary in nature, which is spiritual, uplifting, enlivening, that is where swans are to be seen. Crows are always found near roadkill or in garbage areas. Swans are always found in areas of scenic beauty, such as the one you see behind me: lotus flowers, beautiful waterfalls, lakes, ponds, lots of greenery. But we'll get to the Swan Verse. And of course, in discussing the crows, you cannot help but illustrate your point you're making about crows by counterbalancing it against the desirability of swans. Here is the translation, once again, for the 4th time. Those words which do not describe the glories of the Lord, who alone can sanctify the atmosphere of the whole universe, are considered by saintly persons to be like unto a place of pilgrimage for crows. Since the all-perfect persons are inhabitants of the transcendental abode, they do not derive any pleasure there. We're joined now by Sanjay Sharma, Bhakta Cody, and Raleigh Walter as well. Thank you all for joining us. From the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, 19th verse: Yasha sarva saramba kama sankabhava gyanagni dagda karmani tamahu pandita buddha. One is Yasha sarva saramba. One is considered to be in full knowledge, whose every endeavor is devoid of sense gratification. He is said to be by sages a worker for whom the reactions of work have been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. That's our title today, How to Become Automatically Detached from Matter. You don't have to try separately. Ascetics who do penances and austerities in solitude, in caves, in the jungle, are trying to detach themselves from matter. But it's, as you may know, it's very painful. It's a solitary, lonely, uphill grind to be able to do that. And inevitably, your previous conditioning, your background is going to intrude upon you at the most awkward times. I remember when I was a teenager, I read some books by Nikos Kazantzakis. He wrote Zorba the Greek, but he wrote another book, I think it was called The Passion of Christ. And one of the characters was a ascetic who had been living in a cave for 30 years, and someone came to him and had asked advice. And he said, frankly, don't do this. He said, after 30 years, I still, at the most awkward times, just when I think I'm on top of it, I get in my lonely cave in the forest, I see in Technicolor the twin breasts of a woman. So he said, find some better, more effective means. After 30 years, I still can't. So rather than defining yourself by negation, I don't want to be detached from the material world. I don't want to hanker after women, drugs, and cheap entertainment. I don't want to be a crow. I want to be a swan. Well, choose the direct path, as Krishna recommends in the Bhagavad Gita. Directly engage yourself in spirit. The problem is most people don't understand the depth, the richness, the texture of spirit. They define spirit again by negation. They say, well, if this material world is full of allurements, attractions, inducements, then spirit must be vapid, homogeneous, undifferentiated. But the problem is you can't get attracted to something that's has no differentiation, has no characteristics, has no variety, has no texture to it. So no wonder that's without a clear picture of spirit, no wonder you can't get free from the pull, the downward gravitational pull of matter. But when you get through the disciplic succession, the factual knowledge of the spiritual world, its variety, its texture, its richness, its superiority to this dull, dead, inert world of matter, and you wake up, you become totally enlivened. You can't wait to get to that better transcendental realm. You want to go yesterday. And without knowing about the spiritual world, you want to go tomorrow. Tomorrow's okay. I'm in no hurry. I think it was Hridayananda, he gave a wonderful example that when America was first being settled by the pioneers, they were kind of inching westward, but they had no idea of what lay westward. I think the first 13 states, the most western point that most people had gone and explored and detailed was the Cumberland Gap in Kentucky. So if you looked at maps of the states of America in that era, I don't know, late 1600s, early 1700s, everything would have been detailed more or less along the Atlantic seaboard up to Kentucky and the Cumberland Gap, and then down through perhaps presumably Georgia. But if the maps west of the Cumberland Gap would just show a blank space. It would just show a blank space. You might look at a map and think that once I get past the Cumberland Gap, I'm just going to fall off into outer space. Just be tumbling through outer space for all of eternity, because the map doesn't show any characteristics. The map doesn't show any variety. So not only is that very unappealing, but it's also something you want to avoid, isn't it? if there's no description of the topography west of the Cumberland Gap, why in the world would you want to go there? There's nothing there. There's nothing to attract you. There's nothing to engage you. There's nothing to thrill you. There's no wow factor there. So similarly, we know what matter is. We know the allurements. We know the traps. We know the pitfalls of matter. Couples stand before the altar in front of the priests, their parents, their friends, and well-wishers, and they publicly, in front of God and their relatives and their friends, they declare their eternal, everlasting love for each other. 2 years later, they're divorced, they're fighting, they've got their lawyers, they're going tooth and nail for custody of the children and for division of the property assets. Why is that? Why is that? Those are the pitfalls. That's Maya at work. And we know that. But you can't establish a spiritual fact by negating the problems and pitfalls of material relationships. Vita raga vyakroda manmayana pashara bahuvagana putam mad bhavam agata. There in material relations, there's fear, there's anger, there's resentment in many, many cases. Not in all cases, but so often we see 41% of marriages end in divorce. And even those that stay together, the husband and wife live in a different part of the house. They've got everything divided up. They don't want to separate for the children's sake, but love has long since departed. So we all know how painful and what a slippery slope material relationships can be. But you don't get free of that by negating it. You don't establish a spiritual fact by negating material relationships. Relationships are going to be there, but Krishna says relationships could continue. Relationships are the juice of life. We can't enjoy anything without relationships. Arjuna says, Nahi prapashami mampapadujaj shokam niram avyapapabasha param rajam saranam adijari padam. Krishna, what good would the kingdom do me? Palaces, gold, bodyguards, an army, servants, beautiful drinks, gourmet food, stable full of champion horses, herds of milk-giving cows, wives, retinues, followers, name, fame. What good would any of this do me if I can't enjoy it in the company of my teachers, my friends, and relatives? It'll just be like sand in my mouth. In fact, Prabhupada once described material pleasures in the same way. It's like sweet rice, but some or other it has sand in it. Arjuna makes his point. Without being surrounded by my friends and relatives, how can we enjoy anything? So Krishna is saying in this verse in the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, don't give up your hope so far interaction and relationships are concerned. We are relational beings. That's how we're wired. Krishna has so many connections. The cows, the cowherd boys, the elderly members of Vrindavan, the gopis, the queens of Dwarka, Arjuna's best friend, beside whom he sits on the bed, and they recount to each other their exploits, even bragging on occasion. So many different interconnective relationships. Krishna is all about relationships. You can't understand Krishna without relationships. But what's wrong? Vita, raga, bhaya, krodha. Attachment, fear, and anger. Imagine if we could have purified, spiritual, eternal relationships in which attachment, fear, and anger were absent. That's what Krishna is offering us. From the Srimad Bhagavatam, from the lips of Krishna himself in the Bhagavad Gita, from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we're getting for the first time in the Western countries, first time in our history, a full description and layout of the richness, the texture, the varieties, the desirability, the superiority of the spiritual world. And I can put it very simply in one sentence: the difference between the material and the spiritual world In the spiritual world, matter is conspicuous by its absence. Don't misunderstand that the spiritual world is undifferentiated, homogeneous, ineffable. Not at all. Again, going back to the example of the early pioneers, as they migrated westward looking for new lands and new riches and new opportunities, they mapped. They brought their cartographers with them, and they began to map the territory west of the Cumberland Gap by increments and by stages. So 50 years later, you look at a map of the United States of America. Now it's going to include Illinois, Indiana, Kansas, Iowa. And not only that, but sometimes on the maps they have little icons that represent some of the features like rivers and roads and waters and lakes and forests and things like that. So now you look at the map and it's not just a blank space. It's filled in with all kinds of enticing, attractive details. So that's what Krishna, the saints and sages of the disciplic session, Srila Vyasadeva, who wrote the Bhagavatam at the inspiration of his guru Narada Muni, that's their contribution. They're filling in the spirit, all the details of the spiritual world. So the process of becoming detached from matter becomes so easy. You don't have to negate material varieties and relationships and phenomena. You just have to transfer your attachments to the spiritual world, which isn't difficult to do because once you become aware of the glories, Vaikuntha, that world where there's no fear, there's no birth, there's no death, there's no disease, there's no old age. There's no need of sunlight or moonlight or electricity because the world itself is self-effulgent. And yet at the same time, it has seasons. It has 6 seasons. And there are seasonal festivals. And there are seasonal feasts. There are seasonal celebrations. There are seasonal duties to do with the cows and the agricultural things. There is so much variety in the spiritual world that the more you become informed and aware of it, automatically you lose your taste for this pale, unidimensional, temporary material world full of miseries and suffering. Thanks for joining us, Mr. Willie, from all the way across the country. And Diane, I think also Diane perhaps might be sitting in with you. Subhadra and Britta. Britta makes brilliant, dazzling comments. Bhakti Cody, thank you. And coming to join us on this Motivational Monday, Mr. Lakshmi Nrsimha Prabhu. How are you? And what can you add to this discussion today?
Well, I was immediately what came to mind when you said that the one sentence that describes it, material nature or material energy is conspicuous by its absence. And then I was thinking to myself, I would add 3 words, but not form. Because oftentimes people equate material things or material energy with form and spirituality or spiritual existence without form. But from our perspective as Vaishnavas, we would definitely say, it's conspicuous by its absence, but not form. Form is not conspicuous by its absence.
In fact, there is no form in this material world.
It's illusion.
Get it? In this material world, there's no form. People say, what are you saying, True? That doesn't make sense. Look behind you, True. There's a form of a temple. There's a form of a tree. There's a form of domes and spires. What are you talking about, True? There's no form. Every single thing that you see behind me is constantly changing. Janmadasada me bhava drishtadeshanatmanam tumatmanam kalaneshwara mushanam. Time, which pervades everything, acts on matter in such a way that nothing is stable. Those are not stable forms. Those are reflections of the eternal, substantial forms of trees and domes and waters and fountains in the spiritual world. But they themselves are more like shadows than they are like substance. They are constantly changing. That temple, give it a couple hundred years, and it'll be no longer sustainable. Those trees come and go, depending on the variety of tree, 10, 20, 30. Some trees last for hundreds. There are several trees on the planet that were on the planet when Krishna was on the planet 5,000 years ago. But still, Jalam Janmada Sadime Bhava. Sadime Bhava means everything material goes through 6 transformational phases: birth, growth, duration, reproduction, dwindling, and vanishing. Even the universe follows those 6 transitional phases. So now do you understand what I mean when I say the form is not here? There's no form here. These are only they are reflections of the real trees which are in the spiritual world. You know, we build this temple in Spanish Fort, and there's a technique to increase the longevity of a building. It's called GFRC. Do you know what GFRC is, Lakshmi?
No.
It's glass fiber reinforced concrete. In the old days, they used to just build of concrete. But concrete it pocks. You know, it gets pocked, and it just kind of falls off after some period. It only has a certain amount of adhesiveness. See what I'm saying? So the lifespan of concrete is really only at most like 30, 40 years. But I don't know when it was, but some brilliant engineer type person discovered that when you're making a concrete mold, if you spray into that, when you're, you know, everything, all those domes and columns and arches are popped out of molds, silicone molds, and the molds are concave. So when you spray the concrete, if you simultaneously spray millions and millions of tiny, tiny microscopic resin fiberglass particles, then it holds together for a much longer period of time. So the lifespan of a GFRC building, glass fiber reinforced concrete, is 150, 175 years. But the temples in the spiritual world last forever. They're eternal. The fountains last forever. That Vaibhavi spends so much time maintaining this fountain behind me. It gets fouled up, the filter gets clogged, it gets in the engine, and then it has to be replaced. She spends so much time on that fountain. But the fountain in the spiritual world doesn't need any maintenance at all. It just gives its beauty, distributes its bounty forever. The trees. Chintamani pakara sadmashu kalpa vriksha lakshabritu susurabi bipalyantam lakshmi saha sadbrahma sevyamanam govindamari parusham tamahang bhajami. Can you explain the meaning of this verse to us, Lakshmi? The trees and the cows of the spiritual world?
Yeah, they're all eternal, made of touchstone. There's millions and millions of Lakshmis, or goddesses of fortune, and serving the lotus feet of the Supreme Personality of God. Govindam Adi Purusham. He's the supreme person, Adi Purusham, the original person. Tamaham Bhajami, I offer my prostrate obeisances unto the lotus feet of Govinda.
And he's the source of multifarious potencies. The inferior potencies of the Lord are called material, and the superior potencies are called spiritual or internal. And so his own abode, naturally, is the diffusion of his internal potencies, his spiritual potencies, which are eternal. The inferior potencies are also eternal, but they're in a constant state of transition. The internal potencies of the Lord, of which his own Shwadam, his own particular abode is composed, are eternal, and they don't change. They don't go through any phases of flux and change. But what this all adds up to for us is that we can know for sure that the spiritual world is like 20 billion times better than this material world. And it's full of enriched eternal relationships, the prime of which is your relationship with Krishna, with God. So you don't have to give up anything. You just have to graduate to that higher perception of reality. This example is given by Narada Muni. If you get indigestion due to eating too many milk products, if you drink too much milk, it's hard to digest milk. And if you overindulge, you can get a sore tummy. But the cure for that is also milk, but in a different form, dahi. If you have an upset stomach due to overindulgence in milk, you just take milk in the form of yogurt, and then that will bring about the cure. And so if your present activities being predicated on the enjoyment and the pursuit of material relationships, material toys, is not only not satisfying to you, but it's putting you through hell, the divorce, children, office politics, then you don't have to give up goals and ambitions and relationships. You just have to make them spiritual. You can continue to pursue them, but pursue them with a spiritual focus and a spiritual emphasis. And then you'll become cured of all the misery and suffering. You'll still have relationships, but they'll be without vida, raga, bhaya, attachment, fear, and anger. And wouldn't that be great? Advising his mother in the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, 25th chapter, 20th verse, Kapil Dev says, Ajaram pasharam pashum atmano kavyo saiva sharaju moksha dwaram upovidam. You want to be free from material miseries? You want to make yourself eligible to go back to home, back to Godhead, to the spiritual world? Then just do one simple thing. You're already attached. You're already dependent. You don't have to give it up. You don't have to go into the forest and fast and do austerities and all like that. Just become attached to the great souls, attached to the devotees whose goal are the lotus feet of Krishna. Get in amongst their association. They will carry you to the spiritual world. Once every 8 years, there's this huge gathering called the Kumbh Mela, where 30 million people gather on this sandbank near the confluence of three rivers, the Triveni. And when the stars align, they all go at the same time to take a bath. So if you've ever been in that crowd, you don't have to make your way into the river. You're amongst 30 million people. You just have to be in the middle of the crowd. And even if your feet aren't touching the ground, your shoulders are so squashed up again, they'll just carry you. You'll just float to the river. So similarly, you get yourself in the middle of devotees who are moving progressively back to home, back to Godhead. Rub shoulders and elbows with them in the kirtan. See them jumping up and dancing and smiling. Hear the beautiful sounds of their melodic chanting. Smell the incense and flowers that are offered, and sit down and eat prasadam with the devotees. That's it. You're on your way. You're being moved back to home, back to Godhead. Like, look at Lakshmi. Just look at his smiling, effulgent face. Isn't this the kind of person that you want to go into the future by the side of? I don't know if Lakshmi would say the same about me, but anyway.
Absolutely.
What devotees have influenced you deeply in your devotional career?
First was, of course, Prabhupada in reading his books and hearing the Radha Krishna Temple album. And then the first person I ever met that was a devotee was Mother Mahar, who gave me my first Krishna conscious piece of literature in Port Authority, New York. And then the person that really kind of pushed me over the edge was Vishnu John Swami, because at that time I had some association with devotees. I was reading Prabhupada's books, but I didn't feel like the temple was the place for me at the time, the ashram and crowded, because the temple that I visited was Henry Street. And then I was traveling around. I met Vishnu John Swami in Atlanta, and with his bus. At that time, it was just a yellow school bus. It had just come off of the road show he, just a few months, the roadshow had expired, and so he was traveling. He had like 7 or 8 brahmacharis with him, and it was it was destiny, to meet someone like him, because probably, other than Prabhupada, I don't know who would have influenced me in the way, because he influenced with kindness. He didn't beat you up so much, but it was like always nice prasadam, always nice kirtan. He gave very heartfelt classes. And so, like you said, the train was going out of the station and I had to jump on because when he was leaving Atlanta, I was on my way down to Key West, Florida, to God knows what I was going to do there. But when I met him, and then he was leaving the next morning, and he just said, the train's leaving the station.
It's a destiny moment. It's a destiny moment.
Yeah. And it was funny because I had a dog. It was a beautiful dog. It was a Dalmatian dog that was traveling with me, Titania. And
Chaitanya.
Yeah, almost. And what had happened is I was helping the temple at the time. Balavanta was running for mayor, so I was helping him at the time. He was taking this truck, this like bread truck, and the devotees were sitting on top of the truck, and they were doing kirtan and throwing prasadam. And I was driving because none of the devotees really knew how to drive the truck. So I was with another friend of mine from my hometown. His name was Russell, but he became Radha Raman. He was initiated by Prabhupada, Radha Raman. So we were driving, and we were doing
He's
that.
He's a Radha Raman in Salt Lake.
Yeah, I don't know if that's him. He's
an old Prabhupada disciple. He's pretty eccentric.
Yes, that's him.
He lives in Utah. Yeah.
He was, last I heard, he was in Alachua, but he's an amazing person. Radharman is. He's very practical but very, like you said, very eccentric, very creative. But in any case, what had happened was we were out doing that Harinam with the truck, and my dog was trained that she would wait by my van. I had a van, and these hippies pulled up. They saw her. She was very beautiful. She had very nice coat, sleek. And these hippies pulled up and they got out of the car because they saw the dog just sitting there. It was in like a neighborhood. And Vishnu John Swami was sitting on the little veranda outside the temple at that time. And he said to the hippies, he said, "Hey, do you like that dog?" And the hippie said, "Yeah, man, he's really a cool dog." And he said, "It's my dog. You can have it." So they took the dog, and when I came back, I said, "Where's my dog?" And Vishnu John Swami said, "Oh, these hippies pulled up and they took your dog." So I I thought, okay, that's destiny,
That was your destiny moment.
That's another destiny moment. I guess I was destined to do this, and
sure enough, you transferred your attachment from dog attachment to God attachment.
Yeah, from DOG to GOD.
Sukshma, right. You remember Sukshma?
Yes.
She just made a comment on Facebook. She was part of the bread truck crew in Atlanta, the God We Trust party. She's listening on the Facebook.
Well, if she remembers,
Rupa Manjari says Vishnu Jan Ki Jai. Rupa Manjari too, right?
Yeah. If Sukshma remembers, this is a long time ago. I guess 72 or 73, I think, the summer of 73. If she remembers 2 hippies that were driving that bread truck for Balavanta, that was me and Radha Raman.
We had a similar story too. We did the Festival of India in Los Angeles when I was Life Membership Director, and I just kind of started the Festival of India as a side gig, and we took it to colleges all over Southern California and even Arizona, put up exhibits and catered food and had kirtans and Bharatanatyam dance, Kathak dance. We even hired elephants on occasion, gave elephant rides on campus. It was a great success. I still have a huge binder full of glowing recommendations from USC, UCLA, even some Christian colleges like Cal Lutheran and others. We were operated for about 2 years. And I remember when we went to Tucson, we were doing 2 days at the University of Arizona. And this fellow came up to us. He also had a dog. I remember the dog was named Bandit. And he just kind of hung around and helped. And I had with me Madua. Madua is also a very warm-hearted, very personable guy. Like you said, people don't care how much you know. They don't care how much you know. They want to know how much you care. So Madhu is kind of like Vishnu Janan, not quite as much of a superstar, but very soft-spoken and very considerate. Considerate means you consider the needs and feelings and moods of others. And so during the 2 days we spent on campus, and this fellow, I forget what his name was, he helped out, and Madhua took him under his wing, and I preached philosophy to him. He had a lot of questions. We answered questions. So then it came a decision moment, and we had these two 24-foot trucks that we brought from Ryder. He helped us pack up. Everything was in the van. We were going to go down to Tempe and do a festival at Arizona State University, and he was standing there, and Madhua said, "Why don't you jump in?" And he said, "What about my dog?" And Madhua said, "Krishna will provide. Krishna will take care." So he did. You know who that devotee is?
No.
Madhavananda.
Oh.
One of the most Krishna conscious scholars in our whole movement, who's immersed in Vaishnavism, published Katamrita Bindu every so often for years and years and years. If any of you get a chance to hear Madhavananda, it's like nectar. It's pure nectar, and his background, what he's enriched himself in is the whole history of Vaishnavism. He can tell you in detail about the lives of saints that I've never even heard about, who are part of our rich traditional Vaishnav heritage, the God brothers of Prabhupada, the disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta, the people with whom Bhaktivinoda Thakur associated. He has a breadth of information about our culture and lineage that I don't think anyone of Western upbringing can compete with. So Prashant's with us, and I have to give Prashant a verse. So here's your verse. We haven't thrown out a verse for a while, so let's do this one. It's the second verse, 5th chapter, 5th canto, Srimad Bhagavatam. The speaker is Rishabdev. He says, Mahat Sevam Dara Ahar Vimuktam Tamo Daram Yositam Sangi Sangam Mahantas Te Samachita Prashantash Vimanyava Suri Dasadavo Ye. The Dwaram Vimuktam, the door to liberation, the door to the spiritual kingdom and also let me just add a side note. I was in India in 1973, and Prabhupada was going from Calcutta to Hyderabad, and he was going to give a multi-day program in the public park there in Hyderabad. We were just building a temple on Nampally Station Road. Someone had donated some land, a big sweet confectioner, Zion there. And Prabhupada was getting things jump-started. And we were in Navadvip, so he wanted devotees to join him. And so we spent 3 days on the train. 3 days in third-class train going from Calcutta to Hyderabad. And it would have been okay, except we had a bunch of German devotees, Hansadudaites, and they didn't seem to particularly value the idea of sense control. So they overate, because there was nothing else to do. I don't mean to stereotype, but anyway, it's a fact. The Germans particularly overate, and then all of the second and third day was like projectile vomiting. It was like, oh my God, as if it wasn't bad enough sitting in third-class apartments for 3 days, but you had this smell of vomit all over the place. Sick people who had You don't overeat in India. That's number one rule. Whatever you eat in America, you eat half as much in India. Because India's food has tons of extra bacteria in it. And if you're from India and you've been here all your life, you can handle it. But the food in America has very little bacteria. And so if you eat the same amount of food in India that you eat in America, you're getting like 20 times. You're getting totally overloaded. And that's what they seem to have not realized. And so anyway, we arrived in Hyderabad. And I don't know why, because Prabhupada spoke for several days. But I just have in my memory, Prabhupada up there on the dais, hundreds if not thousands of people in the crowd, a nice summer evening, it was January, but still nice in India. And he's very Mahat Sevam Dwara Mahok, the door to liberation, the gateway to the spiritual world is what? Mahat from Mahatma, the great souls. Those who are engaged, Tesam Yuktita Satatam, Navami Buddhi, those who are 24 hours without any interruption, without any self-concern or ego, fully engaged in the service of the Lord, they are Mahatmas. And by serving them, Mahat Seva, assisting them in their mission to deliver the fallen conditioned souls from this dark, shadow, unsubstantial material world to the real, substantive, spiritual world of eternal bliss and knowledge. If you assist them, then your own entrance into the spiritual world is guaranteed. There's also a flip side. As association can be your ticket to the spiritual world, similarly, the wrong kind of association can be your ticket to hell. And that's described in the next line. Tamo dwaram. The dwaram, there are two doors, the door up and the door down. The door up is achieved by associating with devotees. The tamodwaram, the door down, is achieved by associating with yoshitam sangi sangam. Those who are concerned with illicit connection with women and sense gratification. We all get to choose door number 1 or door number 2. Mahantas te samaprishantas. The Mahatmas are those who see everyone without discrimination. They don't see an elephant. They don't see a dog. They don't see a dog eater. They don't see a Brahmin. They see within each and every living being an eternal spiritual spark, a divine part and parcel of God. They respect all living beings. And when they work for the good of all living beings, all species, all categories, without any discrimination. Vimanyava surya sadhavaya. That's how we define the sadhus. They are indiscriminately working selflessly for the enrichment and ultimate liberation of all living beings. Vishnu Janan was such a Mahat Seva. And ISKCON is a factory. Vishnu Janan was, of course, one of the great heroes of faith, along with Jayananda and others in the early days. They jump-started Krishna consciousness. They got us off the ground. But remember, we've been rolling now for what, 65, 70 years? And that process of getting up early, attending Mangal Arti, chanting Hare Krishna, doing kirtan, japa, distributing books, preaching, associating with devotees, that has gotten now 75 years. It's been rolling down the hill, so to speak. It's gotten a lot of traction, a lot of velocity, a lot of speed, a lot of power. You can go on YouTube now, and I'm telling you, there are so many touchstones, so many people there that are willing, that are ready and willing and capable of lighting you up. You know, what are some of the names? I get inspiration from Amarendra, right? Gauranga Darshan, Gauranga, Chaitanya Charan. I mean, what to speak of Radhanath Swami. You've got Raghunath and Kastuba every day on Wisdom of the Sages, right, Rob? You've got, from London, you've got Surapal, School of Bhakti over there. And I'm probably leaving out tons and tons and tons of other luminaries, you know, just dazzling stars in the sky of Krishna consciousness. What are some other contemporary names you can give us, Lakshmi, that when you hear them or see them, you're just so happy to be in the same International Society for Krishna Consciousness with them?
Well, I mean, I always have a penchant for the unsung heroes of Krishna consciousness, and they're in different categories. Of course, our God brothers who have been faithfully serving for many years with hardly recognition, like Anuttama Morrison out of DC.
And the other
He's
Anutama as well.
Yes, both Anuttamas are just absolutely exemplary.
Treasures, treasures.
Yeah, I mean Anuttama, the communications director, he has some recognition in the sense that because of his position. But Anuttama Morrison, he's had no position other than service to his family and dedication and faith to Srila Prabhupada. So those are two personalities. And another one from our generation is Vishnu Gada, who's been in Philadelphia, first New York and then Philadelphia for many years. And he is kind of like the unsung hero of that particular yatra. He's caused so many people to develop deep faith in Krishna consciousness. He developed their Sunday school program that's been going on for years and years. So those are a couple of the personalities. The youth, another personality I absolutely love from our generation is Hubby. Hubby sometimes comes and visits me in Puerto Rico. He's very famous in South America, particularly Venezuela, and he has some recognition here in Puerto Rico because of he's a pop star.
In Spanish, right? His things in Spanish, right?
Yeah, and he's just an amazingly devoted. Another person, a couple, is Atita Guna and Pancharatna out in Mayapur.
Ancharat is amazing. Decade after decade, he's always there supporting.
Yeah.
And his interviews, the interviews that Pancharatna does, he's a really good interviewer.
Yes.
He really brings out the best in his interviews, and he adds jewel-like tidbits to the conversation too.
Yeah. And then there's a whole group of devotees who have faithfully served Radha Govinda in New York. The Achyuta Gopi and her brother Ananta, who come from their parents. I mean, their parents have been around. Adidev and Antaranga, they've been around since the 70s, just being exemplary grihastas. Their case history of people who came to the temple, served faithfully for years and years, produced offspring who are super Krishna consciousness, who produced offspring who are super Krishna, so they're another. And then there's Shiva Radya. There were three or four Indians that joined in the 70s, which was really unheard of. And that was basically Shiva Radya. And he produced two sons that are amazingly Krishna conscious, Chaitanya Nanda and Pradumya. And then Adya, so Shiva Radya, Adya, and Vedavyas Priya Maharaj. Though they became Indians who actually joined the temple and did seva. Adya didn't join the temple, but he did a lot of seva. So, I mean, when I think of what you just said, the list goes on and on, the different tiers of generations. Of course, Vishwambar Sheth and his family, his mother and his, the Mayapuris, and the Bali Rico and Kishore, those guys. I just love being near them. I just feel so enlivened when I'm near those guys because, they just exude enthusiasm for kirtan. Just like whenever I feel down, I'm a little down on myself about my kirtan, whatever, I'll listen to them and get influence injected by their enthusiasm for kirtan and just say how fortunate you are. So there's different tiers of inspiration for me. And I usually go for the unsung heroes because, they definitely didn't do it for name, fame, and glory. They just did it because that's who they are. So, and there's
Wonderful.
one other person I want to mention, and he gets recognition, but in a different way. Dr. Edwin Bryant, and his name is Adwaita. He was initiated in the late 70s, and he's another amazing personality when it comes to, you know, absorption in Krishna consciousness. Okay,
Well,
sorry.
there you have it. There you have it. If you're new and you're kind of casting about looking for places to let down your anchor, there you've got a whole list of personalities. If you happen to have taken notes, or you can contact Lakshmi through Facebook if you want to know the actual spelling of these people. But a word to the wise, they're not likely to jump out at you because they're not high profile personalities, but they're the kinds of personalities who are after Krishna's own heart, serving without name and recognition, decade after decade after decade. If you don't get recognized by the world or even by your own God brothers particularly, know this for certain. You're going to be definitely recognized by Krishna and gathered back to home, back to Godhead. We're running really late because it's talking about the devotees so much nectar, and I have to be in the kitchen in half an hour to cook some huge, mega amounts of subji. But before we do kirtan, a word or two from Rob. I know that he's got into Krishna consciousness because of wisdom of the sages, Raghunath and Kastuba. Do you want to pay tribute to those two great souls for a moment before we conclude here, Rob?
Absolutely, Prabhuji. Thank you. Yeah, they've made Krishna consciousness so easily accessible and understandable to this age. Their personalities are very conducive to roping you in and encouraging you to investigate further. Raghunath's flamboyance and outgoingness and his sense of humor are easy to relate to, and Kastuba's mellow insightfulness is very counterpoint to Raghunath, and so it's a great dynamic to be introduced to Krishna consciousness for someone that may not be familiar with it. At least for me, from my experience, and I'm incredibly grateful for the podcast that they put on and the wisdom and knowledge that they share and the way that they share it.
Wisdom of the Sages every day, every day. More than 300 episodes so far. Just Google Wisdom of the Sages or search in Facebook and get your connection going there. We get to associate with Rob practically every single broadcast. Rob is a jewel. He's a wonderful, wonderful devotee in progress, and that's all because of Raghunath and Kastuba. Pranams, my head at the feet of Raghunath and Kastuba. So just now, signing off before a beautiful kirtan, John Malik, thanks for being with us. Divya Joshi, Haribo Divya. Advaita Charya's mother, joining us from Croatia, Radmila Zeko, Haribo. Ram Nashringadas, with whom we have 383 mutual friends. Hare Krishna. Dharma Vibhavana, topping that. We have 420 mutual friends with Dharma Vibhavana. Pranams Prabhu. Irish Mike A. Ryan, our friend from Las Vegas, I believe. Thanks for jumping in. Subhadra Rampore. Sundari Priya. Britta Stump, thank you for your contribution through PayPal last night. And Sundari Priya, as well as Radhe Sham Prabhu, our old friend Sanjaya Sharma, Raleigh Walter, Onkar Joshi, Danelle Willie, Krishna Premavati, Vaibhavi, Anjali, the comment queen. Please make your comments as profusely as you can. Ram Kishore, Prashant Sig, Rupa Manjari, Natasha, thanks for joining us. Sorry I missed you last night. We'll get together soon. Jean Eskelson. Thank you, one and all. We'd like to direct your attention to Patreon/Utah Krishnas. Go there and see what's on offer. Transcripts of our talks, MP3s, Srimad Bhagavatam sets, Bhagavad Gita's, monthly calls on Zoom. We're at the service of those who serve the devotees and the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as well as those like Lakshmi who bring us the transcendental holy name of the Lord. in such a palatable way.
Yeah, but we should definitely take one moment to mention Caru Prabhu, who has actually run from the spotlight, but Krishna wouldn't let him run too far. Krishna,
I
you
don't
know,
know
like
all these devotees like you do because I've been exiled to Utah for the last 35 years.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. You ran from the spotlight, but Krishna, like when you're on stage and the guy has the spotlight, you can try to hide in a corner of the stage, and the spotlight follows you. So when you do nice service for Krishna, he's saying, "Oh no, I want to give my devotee credit. My devotee has done so much." So True gets that. Always.
You'd expect that compliment from the generous-hearted Lakshmi Nrsimha.
Just trying to be honest. Okay, I'm going to dedicate, this one is actually Vishnu John Swami wrote this melody. He was, I think, the only devotee that Prabhupada sanctioned to write melodies, at least while Prabhupada had manifest his Leela here. And so I remember hearing this melody. It just came to mind when we got to talking about it. And he was singing the melody on the ektar. So I've got both going here. I just hope I have it in tune because I wasn't prepared for this. But anyway, this is the melody that Vishnu John Swami wrote. The second part of it, I kind of wrote it. I thought that maybe he didn't, or he would want to complete it because most of our melodies have two parts to it. So. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Lakshmi, I'm sure everyone agrees with me that that was divine. That was just divine. Anyone ever told you have a wonderful voice, full of devotion?
I've been told I sound like a frog.
Maybe in the spiritual world. Maybe
Yeah,
a frog in the spiritual world.
I'll be a frog on the Jamuna anytime.
Yeah. I guess retrospectively, we can dedicate this show to the great Krishna Swami, one of the
Yeah.
founding fathers of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Thanks to all of those who joined us. Feel free to comment. I'm going to go into the kitchen. We're doing a motivational Monday marathon, cooking marathon, to try and create huge quantities, which will stand the buffet in good stead for weeks to come. So wish me luck. But don't let that discourage you from making comments. I won't be able to respond right away, but later on in the day, I'll look very much forward to seeing what you have to say, answering any questions you might have, and getting back to you. In the meantime, don't forget to chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna
Krishna, Hare
Krishna,
Hare,
Hare Hare,
Hare Rama,
Hare Rama,
Rama,
Hare Rama,
Rama Rama,
Rama Rama,
Hare
Hare